Welcome, you curious minds. Today, we are strapping in for a deep dive that doesn't just, challenge historical assumptions. It attempts to rewrite the geographical map of the Holy Land based purely on linguistic code.
That's right.
We received this stack of sources, and it's all centered on a really rigorous linguistic mathematical analysis of the Quran. Our mission today is to tackle one single fundamental question. Are Bakkah and Makkah the same place?
Or, as this research powerfully posits, are they two entirely independent, even opposite geographic and functional poles?
It's a huge undertaking, really.
It is. We are, for the purposes of this analysis, temporarily setting aside centuries of established historical narrative, cultural traditions, all of it. We're even setting aside the assumption that these two names are just simple phonetic variations for the same site.
So the focus is almost clinical.
It's clinical, yes. It's guided by this rigorous methodology pioneered by Dr. Khaled Waleed, the owner of the Almighty Covenant. We are relying exclusively on the internal structural data of the Quran.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning root analysis, context, and quantitative usage. We're trying to determine if the text itself mandates a duality.
And that's the core conflict, isn't it? I mean, for most people, for centuries, Makkah and Bakkah have been treated as synonyms. Maybe a slight dialectal difference for the city we all think we know today.
Right. But you're saying the language itself, when you put it under this kind of microscopic lens, dictates that they cannot be the same place.
Precisely. Dr. Waleed's methodology operates on a core principle.
Which is?
That the Quran is a precision-engineered text where no word is redundant. If two different words exist, they must have two different functions.
So no synonyms, basically.
Yeah, in this context. And our analysis today posits a massive spatial duality. Bakkah as the ultimate spiritual heart, which this research positions in the West, specifically Palestine.
And Makkah as the physical, strategic, and conflict management center, which is positioned in the East, specifically Jordan.
Exactly. So we start our reconstruction not with maps, but with roots. Okay, let's unpack this core argument right at the root level, the difference between Bakkah and Makkah.
Mm-hmm.
It really just comes down to changing a single letter, the bong to the mem. Why in the world of Semitic philology does this seemingly tiny change create such an insurmountable linguistic barrier?
This is the foundation of the entire argument. It's everything. In the Semitic family of languages, and especially in Arabic, the core identity and the semantic field of almost every word is locked into a three-letter root system.
The famous trilateral root.
Yes. And this root isn't just an arbitrary set of sounds. It's the conceptual engine of the word. So when you change one of those foundational letters, one of the radicals, you're not just tweaking the pronunciation. You are generating an entirely new lexical identity and, crucially, an independent semantic space.
So if I'm getting this right, it's not like comparing tomato and tomato.
Yeah.
Or like an American saying aluminum and a Brit saying aluminium. The meaning and the object are identical there.
Absolutely not. That's a perfect analogy. That would be a mere phonetic variation. Here, the research points out something fundamental. Bakkah derives from the root BKK.
Bakkah.
And Makkah derives from the root mkafkaf.
The shift from Bak to Meme is what morphologists call a radical change. It changes the root itself. If we were to accept them as synonyms, we would have to argue for some kind of systemic, consistent rule in Arabic that allows the Ba and the Meme to just swap out in roots without altering the core meaning.
And no such rule exists.
No such rule exists consistently in classical Arabic that applies across the board, especially not for a place name of this significance.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here, which is basically what centuries of traditional scholarship have done. They argue for a phenomenon called ibdal. It's a process of substitution or maybe a dialectal alternation. How does this research specifically counter the claim that Bakkah is just, the older dialectal version of Makkah? That's a critical question. And Dr. Waleed's refutation is structural and, interestingly, mathematical. First, this kind of substitution, this ibdal, it very rarely happens with such foundational, geographically significant proper names in a text that's aiming for linguistic universality.
It would be too confusing.
It would undermine the precision. Second, and this is the real killer argument, the roots they generate carry almost antithetical meanings, which we're about to get into. If the root for Bakkah, let's call it Tamaraka, and the root for Makkah, Naralals, were truly interchangeable, they would have to share a core semantic field.
And they don't.
They demonstrably do not in the Quranic usage. So the research concludes, mathematically, a baller is not equal to non-brawlers. They define two distinct sets of meaning, period.
That structural separation is fascinating. It's like saying they're two different operating systems, not just two different skins for the same app.
Exactly.
But the argument goes even deeper than that. It suggests that the letters themselves carry functional meaning, that their sound mechanics, how you physically make the sound, dictates their semantic application. This is where it gets really interesting for me.
It's deep linguistics, yes.
Yeah.
The physical mechanism of producing a sound carries semantic weight. Let's start with the ball. It is a labial explosive consonant.
Labial meaning you use your lips.
You make the sound by closing your lips and then releasing a puff of air. Poof! It's an outward sound. And in the Arabic lexicon, this explosive outward sound is powerfully associated with beginnings, initiation, emergence, outward motion.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Certainly. Think of the word ba, which means beginning, or barakah, which is blessing, an outpouring of good, or even bark, lightning, a sudden flash of emergence.
I see. So it's all about a starting point, something coming out.
Yes. So when you apply this to the name Bakkah, this ba at the beginning suggests the pole of the first explosion. It's the moment of the initial placement of the house, and it's the source of an outward flow.
An outward flow of.
Of blessing, barakah, and guidance, huda, for all the worlds. It represents the creation protocol. It's the starting gun. Furthermore, the root BKK itself structurally relates to the concept of tazahum. It means a powerful crowding and pressing of people around a single unified point of value. It's what happens at an origin point.
Okay, so you have this dynamic, explosive ba. Now contrast that with the mim.
The mim presents the functional opposite. It's also a labial sound. You use your lips, but it's nasal and continuous. To make the sound, your lips close, but the air continues to flow through your nose.
It's contained.
The physical mechanism itself is fundamentally associated with containment, gathering, completion, and inward motion. It's a sense of closure, of holding something in.
So closed lips, contained breath.
Exactly. Think of the Arabic word tama, which means completed or finished. Or katam, sealed, closed, or hama, gathered, contained. The very sound of mim evokes a geographical womb or a container.
Wow. So this means Makkah, starting with that mim, must represent a function of containment and finality, which is completely opposite to Bakkah's function of emergence and beginning.
Absolutely. When applied to Makkah, this meme suggests a geographical womb, a containment area where conflicts are managed, where hands are restrained, and where results are finalized. It suggests a strategic or military center concerned with conclusion and containment.
And the root itself, MKK.
The root MKK relates to concepts like istikla or istikhraj.
Which means to extract or to seek out what is contained within?
Precisely. This fits the context of managing a conflict to its resolution, of extracting a victory or sealing a result. This deep-seated phonetic difference inherent in the initial letter inherently supports the idea of duality and opposition.
So they're functioning as two complementary poles.
Not mere synonyms.
The genius of this methodology, then, is that it doesn't even need to look outside the text. It finds the proof of separation built right into the phonetic DNA of the words themselves. It dictates that Bakkah must be the beginning, and Makkah must be the conclusion or containment.
That is the cornerstone. The moment you accept this level of linguistic precision, the traditional synonymity just collapses. We're looking at a system that was designed for balance, and balance requires two distinct, non-overlapping anchors.
Okay, so moving beyond the structural roots, let's look at the data signature, the textual environment surrounding these two locations. This is the quantitative core of Dr. Waleed's methodology, treating the Quran like a massive database.
Right. And the first thing we have to note is a crucial statistical anomaly. Both words are what's known as hapax legomenon.
Which, for our listeners who might be less familiar with textual analysis, means each word appears only once in the entire Quran.
Only once. Now, this is statistically significant, because in a text of over 6,000 verses, if two concepts were truly identical or interchangeable, you'd expect something different.
You'd expect the author to either use one exclusively, or use them both multiple times interchangeably, to show no preference.
Exactly. The fact that each is used once and only once points strongly toward a deliberate, isolated appearance for a very specific function.
But why is that statistic more powerful than if they each appeared, say, 10 times?
Because if they appeared 10 times, the chance of them accidentally having zero contextual overlap decreases.
Yeah.
By appearing only once, they are hyper-specialized. The author has allocated a single unique linguistic slot for Bakkah and a single unique linguistic slot for Makkah.
So that forces us to analyze those single slots with maximum scrutiny.
Knowing they carry non-negotiable, unique information. Their surrounding environments, their context, that's what defines them.
Okay, let's look at Bakkah first. It's found in Surah Al-Imran, verse 96. What is the contextual field there? What words cluster around Bakkah?
Bakkah's context is entirely foundational, universal, and value-driven. The surrounding linguistic field includes these non-negotiable keywords. The first house, Alal Bait.
Okay, the very first.
Placed for people, Wachila Naz, blessed Mubarakah, and crucially, guidance for all the worlds, Huda lil Alamin.
The scope there is completely open. It's targeting people and the worlds. It's universal.
It's utterly open. And this confirms the boss function we talked about, the function of emergence and universal beginning.
So it's describing an intrinsic, immutable quality of that location, a foundational spiritual capital for all of humanity.
Exactly. Its linguistic function is static. It's focused on divine value, sanctity, and foundation. The research notes that Bakkah appears in the data as a spatial synonym for al-Bayt, the house. So it links that spot intrinsically to worship, to sanctity, and to absolute divine intention. It's a signpost for humanity's beginning.
Okay, now Makkah, found in Surah Al-Fath, verse 24. This tells a completely different story. It's kinetic, it's human.
Makkah's context is intensely physical, conflict-based, geographical, and time-specific. The associated field includes phrases like interior womb of Makkah, Bana Makkah.
The womb, that containment idea again.
Precisely. Then you have restrain their hands from you, and after granting you victory, min ba'da farakum. The scope is completely closed. It's targeting specific opposing groups, their hands, your hands, over them.
So it's a discussion of military engagement, of strategic geography, of conflict resolution.
It is. So Makkah is associated with tactical concepts like al-Fath, which means victory or opening, and al-Tamkin, empowerment. It links the geography not to universal guidance, but to a specific historical outcome. It's a battleground or a strategic containment zone.
That is the unavoidable conclusion from the data.
And we can apply a simple mathematical model here, which Dr. Waleed uses to make the proof explicit. If we define the set of surrounding keywords for Bakkah as ses pilar.
So that's first house, blessed worlds.
And for Makkah as sekana womb, restrained hands, victory. The quantitative analysis reveals that the intersection of these two sets is empty. Sex and talo cap sm are nothing.
An empty set, which means there is not a single shared keyword, concept, or emotional register between the two environments. That is the aha moment that should stop you in your tracks.
It is the internal proof of independence. If they were synonyms, the language would inevitably mix the terminology.
Right. You'd expect to see Bakkah mentioned in the context of the battle sometimes, or Makkah when talking about the first house.
Of course. But the complete absence of shared keywords, zero correlation in their linguistic signature is, according to Dr. Waleed, the absolute core proof. The Quran treats them as two closed, distinct linguistic systems.
So Bakkah's function is abstract and qualitative Bakkah, Huda.
And Makkah's function is material and kinetic bant, AD hands, afar, victory.
It really seems like a massive oversight of traditional scholarship to have merged these two distinct functional concepts into a single entity, given the textual evidence.
It speaks to the power of historical narrative overriding linguistic precision. If you start with the assumption they're the same, you will read the context of Makkah, which is conflict, into Bakkah, which is guidance, and vice versa. You blur the sacred boundaries that the text itself explicitly engineered. And this leads us directly to the functional separation.
Right. So the separation isn't confined to the roots or the immediate surrounding words. It extends into the very essence of what these places represent, and also when they exist in the timeline of creation and human history. Let's delve into that functional duality first.
The functions are mirror opposites. They represent the necessary tension that drives divine purpose. The function of Bakkah, which we can call $5 revolves around the core concepts of house, blessing, guidance, universality, primacy. It describes an unmoving, intrinsic quality. It is the blueprint.
The divine blueprint.
Dr. Waleed refers to Bakkah as the stability and divine setting, the fixed spiritual reference point, the source of what he calls al-qima, or value.
Value, intrinsic worth, guidance, the things that don't change regardless of human behavior.
Precisely. Now, the function of Makkah, FM Mera, is conflict, restraint of hands, victory, sequential time. It's the womb or containment area. It is descriptive of an active, changing event or process.
So Makkah represents human conflict and dynamic change.
It is the execution of the blueprint, the testing ground. It's the source of al-quwa, or power.
That is a phenomenal conceptual split, Bakkah as value and Makkah as power. We often assume that the spiritual center must also be the military center, but the text, through this analysis, argues they must be separate poles to maintain balance.
It's a foundational principle.
Because you can't judge the fixed spiritual value by the variable results of earthly power.
You can't. The source material notes that you cannot merge the moment of the first explosion, which is Bakkah, which is pure concept, with the continuous flow, which is Makkah, which is human struggle.
What happens if you do merge them?
If the source of power, Makkah, and the source of value, Bakkah, are merged into one place, power inevitably corrupts the value, or the value becomes ineffective in the face of dynamic conflict. The duality preserves the integrity of both.
This concept of fixed value versus dynamic power must be reflected in the time frame the words occupy. How does the choice of verb tense in the Quran solidify this distinction between the eternal and the historical?
It's very precise. Bakkah is intrinsically linked to the absolute past, the origin. It's connected to the first house, and the verb was placed, wachia.
A past tense verb.
A perfect passive past tense. This signifies an established static truth, a moment of foundation that precedes all historical human subjects. It's the moment of inception, totally independent of human time.
So Bakkah exists in what you can call vertical time. It connects the divine setting to earthly reality in a single timeless moment.
Exactly. It belongs to the Azali couple, which means eternity. It represents stability. Makkah, conversely, is anchored in relative and active time, the historical event. It's linked to sequential action, such as after granting you victory, min badan ofarkum.
That's a specific sequence of events.
A specific sequence resulting from struggle. It belongs to the Adathi couple, the event.
So Makkah operates in horizontal time, connecting specific human conflicts and their outcomes. It's the time of the great ongoing human experiment.
And this time structure dictates the geography. Bakkah is the fixed benchmark of divine intent, located at the spiritual origin point. Makkah is the laboratory where that intent is tested through human conflict and consequence, located at the strategic point of engagement.
So the research concludes that this separation of function, time, and audience means the text is describing two different levels of existence.
A cosmic value pole, which is Bakkah, and a geographic conflict pole, Makkah. And so we move from abstract linguistic proof to mapping this necessary duality onto physical geography.
Okay, this is the section where the argument makes its colossal geopolitical leap. This exhaustive linguistic and temporal duality must be projected onto a very specific and historically significant geography, the land surrounding the Great African Rift Valley. I mean, this is not just a claim about a city name, it's a claim about the entire physical structure of the Holy Land.
This is where we transition from philology to, you could say, geological theology, using the sources provided. The linguistic evidence, when you map it onto the Quranic description of the Holy Land, establishes three interconnected poles. And they're all centered around this massive geological fissure, the Great Rift Valley.
And this valley functions as a kind of divider.
It functions as the divine berzakh, a barrier or a separating membrane. And it confirms the logic of duality established earlier. And of everything, we have created pairs, Zaljan, that you may remember. The geography reflects the linguistic structure.
That's a monumental claim. Why is the geological fissure of the Rift Valley accepted as the textual blueprint? Does the Quranic text itself provide geological clues that link Tursino and Tursinan to this specific fissure?
The research highlights how the physical description of the land and the surrounding Quranic passages necessitates this understanding. The Rift Valley, the Jordan Valley, Ghor al-Urdun, down to the Dead Sea, is the deepest, most striking geographical barrier in the region.
It's the dividing line between the African and Asian continental plates.
It's a physical manifestation of separation and pairing. And the names of the mountains themselves, Tursina and Tursinan, relate directly to concepts that, when mapped, sit on opposite sides of this rift.
Let's detail the West Pole first. This is the one linked to Bakkah and Palestine.
The West Pole is identified as Tursina, Mount Sinai, which is conceptually associated with the historical region of the West Bank and Palestine. This area sits on the African side of the rift.
And linguistically?
Linguistically, it's linked to the concept of asana, which means radiance or light, and nur. This is the pole of blessing, barakah. It's the pole of the house and universal guidance. It is Bakkah.
So it's the spiritual and value center, the point of divine placement, the site of the house first placed for people.
Its nature is one of radiant guidance.
And the East Pole, Makkah, is the Asian side of the rift, the pole of hardness and struggle.
The east pole is Tursinen, often associated with the mountainous regions of Jordan. This sits on the Asian side of the rift. This pole is linked to At-Tasnin,
which means sharpness, roughness, hard terrain.
and also the act of sharpening or preparation. It is the pole of warning. This is the pole of the womb, Alban, of conflict, restriction, and victory. This is Makkah.
And geographically, the argument is that cities like Petra, which are carved directly into the hard, sharp mountains of Jordan,
They perfectly embody the idea of the Benuno Makkah, the womb or interior of a sharp, rugged containment area. It reflects the site of struggle and military strategy. This represents the material and military center.
that creates such a clear geographical axis running west, which is Bakkah, light, Palestine, to east, which is Makkah, sharpness, Jordan.
But what about the separation point itself? The valley.
That is the Wadi Tawa, the folded holy valley,
Tawa means folded.
or enveloped. This is the geological Berzakh, the great rift valley, folded between the two continents. It is the deep recessed area of the Dead Sea Valley, the Gor al-Urdun. Functionally, it is the point of contact and separation. It's the sacred juncture where Moses was commanded to remove his sandals.
Right, remove his sandals, which is symbolic of shedding the material connection to the earth. Precisely. The removal of the sandals is symbolic of shedding the material constraints of the earth, standing at the geological separation point, the Berzakh, before entering the realm of the divine. It's the necessary transition zone between the pole of material struggle, which is Makkah in the east, and the pole of divine guidance, Bakkah in the west.
So if the traditional view merged Bakkah and Makkah into one location in the Arabian desert, what happens to this foundational structure? The two easts and two wests that the Quran emphasizes.
The structure collapses. This system establishes Bakkah in the west of the rift, the pole of radiance, and Makkah in the east, the pole of sharpness. This is the mandatory duality implicit in the verse. Lord of the two easts and Lord of the two wests.
Mashriqin and Maghribi.
By merging Bakkah and Makkah, you destroy the balance, you eliminate the Berzakh, and you negate the very geographical principles upon which the revelation is built. The internal logic of the Quran, according to this analysis, requires this specific geographical duality.
A duality that links the spiritual heart, Bakkah, to Palestine, and the strategic center, Makkah, to Jordan.
That is a staggering argument, moving from the microscopic detail of a single letter to the massive geological scale of a continental plate boundary.
It demonstrates the integrity of the text. If the linguistic data says they are not equal and the contextual data shows zero overlap, then the geographic mapping must also adhere to separation.
Resulting in this duality of the two poles around the Great Rift Valley.
Okay, to solidify this separation between the two functional poles, the West Spiritual Center, Bakkah, and the East Military Center, Dr. Waleed's analysis draws out a crucial linguistic distinction. It's one that has been largely flattened by traditional interpretation, and that's the difference between Al-Haram and Al-Muharram.
This linguistic precision is the key to understanding sovereignty and security in this Holy Land system. When we talk about Aram, we are talking about an intrinsic quality. Al-Haram is associated with Bakkah, as in Al-Bayt al-Haram, the sacred house. The root HRM here implies sacredness, honor, and sanctity, Irma.
So Bakkah is intrinsically holy. How does that affect its safety or its security?
Security, or Aman, at Bakkah, flows from its inherent divine sanctity. It is spiritual sovereignty. Think of Al-Balad al-Amin, the secure land, which is associated with this region. It is a place where holiness itself generates safety.
So it's like a UNESCO World Heritage Site or a sacred national park. Its value and protection are intrinsic to its nature flowing outward.
That's a great analogy. Now contrast that with Muharram, Al-Muharram, which is associated with Makkah. This term is descriptive of a specific act of prohibition or restriction. It uses the passive participle form. The root means to forbid, as in Aramaha, he forbade or restricted it.
So it implies restriction, prohibition, and forbiddance.
It does. The distinction is between an inherent state, which is haram or sacred, and an applied action, which is muharram or restricted.
Exactly. And security at Makkah flows not from inherent sanctity, but from external, procedural, or military restriction.
The restriction is imposed to achieve a strategic objective like managing a conflict or ensuring tactical safety.
That completely reframes Makkah. It's not just a holy site. It's a protected, restricted zone necessary for a specific purpose. A military containment area, which perfectly aligns with the context of restraining hands and victory found in its single Quranic mention.
Makkah functions as the physical stronghold, the restricted zone, the area of strategic containment.
So Bakkah is sacred because of its divine status and universal value.
And Makkah is restricted because of military or procedural necessity required to protect the system that flows from Bakkah. This linguistic split validates the entire West-East value-power duality.
This duality is beautifully supported by the cosmic oaths found in the Quran. They seem to reflect the nature of the terrain in these two separate geographies. I'm talking about the oath by the fig and the olive.
These oaths are not random. They are cosmic coordinates. They anchor the duality to the land itself.
Let's start with the olive, the zaytun.
The olive is universally associated with Bakkah, the West, Palestine. It is the blessed tree, linked to Nur, light from its oil, and Barakah, blessing. It signifies spiritual stability, endurance, and radiant guidance.
And it thrives in that blessed terrain of the Tur-Sinai zone, the West Pole. It's a symbol of the spiritual stability that comes from Bakkah.
It is. And the fig, the tin, which sounds rougher, more durable.
The fig is associated with Makkah, the East, Jordan.
It's a materially dense, robust fruit that typically grows in strong, dry, rocky environments.
Like the Tur-Sinan, the sharp mountainous terrain associated with Jordan and Petra.
Exactly. It signifies material strength, physical resilience, and productive power, the necessary ingredients for the military and strategic pole.
So the pairing is a final layer of textual evidence that the two locations have opposing yet complementary functions.
One yielding spiritual blessing, the olive, the other yielding material resilience, the fig.
It's an extraordinary level of forensic textual analysis, where even the choice of fruit confirms the distinction between the sacred sanctuary and the strategic restricted zone.
And this forensic precision is why the research argues that merging them is a monumental error. It scrambles the cosmic coordinates.
So the conclusion drawn from this entire linguistic, temporal, and geographical deep dive is that the duality of Bakkah and Makkah is not a historical accident. It's foundational to the entire concept of cosmic balance al-mizan.
The Quran explicitly states this rule of universal balance. And of everything, we have created pairs, Zajain, that you may remember. Balance necessitates two opposing, non-overlapping anchors. If you only have one pole, the system inevitably tilts and collapses.
So Bakkah and Makkah are the two necessary poles for this cosmic scale, this divine balance sheet.
They are the Zajain, the pair. Bakkah represents the pole of absolute good. Guidance, blessing, peace, the moment of foundation and creation. It is the reference point for intrinsic value, Alpima.
And Makkah represents the pole of trial.
Conflict, military power, warning, strategic containment. It is the reference point for earthly power, al-Quwa, and the management of struggle.
And this allows humanity to constantly check its earthly power against the eternal value.
It does. Which brings us to the most provocative part of the research by Dr. Khaled Waleed. If this duality is the bedrock of the entire system, the merging of these two poles into one location historically distant from the true Holy Land
is described as a great deception or even linguistic sorcery.
That is the claim. This linguistic merging is seen as a deliberate act by those seeking to obscure the true spiritual center in the West, the Bakkah-Halquids region, and to displace the physical strategic center, the Makkah-Petra region.
And the consequence of this merge is the loss of spiritual balance, a disconnection from the true geography of the revelation.
It confuses the source of value with the location of power.
This dualistic map then allows us to reread the function of central rituals like the Hajj, not merely as a geographically constrained journey, but as a mandatory cognitive journey across this functional duality.
Exactly. The ritual reflects the necessary movement between the poles. If we apply the geographical poles of the system, the West, Bakkah in Palestine, and the East, Makkah in Jordan, the Hajj becomes a pilgrimage of consciousness and transition.
So where does the journey start?
The journey is understood to start at the East Pole, at Makkah, the site of material power and purging from false idols, acknowledging the site of struggle, al-Bun. The ritual of Say, the running between Al-Afa and Al-Marwa, in this context, is the symbolic journey across the valley, across the geological Barzakh.
From the material containment to the spiritual origin.
Precisely. And it concludes at the West Pole, at Bakkah, symbolizing the spiritual destination.
So concluding the essential journey of the West Bakkah pole signifies arriving at the pole of spiritual blessing, safety, and the house first placed for humanity.
The source of peace and guidance. This movement from material engagement and struggle, which is Makkah and power, to spiritual foundation and stability, Bakkah and value. That is the essence of the journey, the restoration of al-Mizan.
And finally, the research connects Bakkah's function, the pole of guidance, to the cosmic concept of a celestial navigational guide. this star.
The concept of Bakkah as a star, Najum, is central to the universal guidance function assigned to it in the text. The Quran swears by the positions of the stars. Bakkah is implicitly identified as the Star of Jerusalem, Najmat al-Quds, the ultimate spiritual anchor.
The ultimate reference point for those who are lost.
It functions as the Mashar al-Aram, the sacred sensor or signal emitter, a navigational beacon. The famous verse, "And by the star they are guided," takes on profound meaning here.
So Bakkah, this fixed point of spiritual light and guidance, is what guides those lost in the sea of life back to the safe harbor, the blessed land.
That's the idea. The stability of Bakkah is the spiritual anchor for the globe.
So the loss of Bakkah's true status, the merging of its function with the site of conflict, that is equated to the star falling, al-Naish itahawa.
Which leads humanity to fundamental deviation and misguidance because the distinction between value and power has been erased.
The stability of the spiritual pole is paramount. When the map of consciousness is compromised, all subsequent human action is built on a distorted foundation.
And this deep dive, using the purely linguistic and quantitative methods of Dr. Khaled Waleed, compelled us to reconsider the entire geographic and functional framework of the Holy Land based solely on the structural integrity of the Quranic text itself.
What an exhaustive analysis based purely on the text. I mean, we have seen how distinct linguistic roots, zero contextual correlation, clear temporal separation, and a definitive geographical framework. All of it demands that Bakkah be located in the west, in Palestine as the house of blessing, and Makkah in the east, in Jordan, as the wound of conflict.
This reestablishes the Quran as a precision-engineered text where no word is redundant or a mere synonym. It forces us, the learners, to recognize that the pursuit of truth begins with absolute linguistic accuracy and acknowledging the divine balance, al-mizan, in all its dimensions. The text insists that the two poles must exist independently to define the cosmic scale.
So if the core purpose of the Quran is to establish a perfect balance, al-mizan, between the spiritual pole of value, Bakkah, and the pole of earthly struggle and power, Makkah, what does it mean for our spiritual state and our collective consciousness today if these two fundamental anchors of the universe have been linguistically merged and geographically displaced into a single historically disconnected location? If the star has truly fallen, how do we navigate back to the principle of balance? And what is the responsibility of those who seek the truth in the text to restore the true geography of the heart? This is a question of consciousness and sovereignty that the text, through this research, now demands we address. We encourage you to seek out this compelling work and continue your own deep dive into the precision of the covenant.